The gang members with whom I am privileged to work, they don't really kind of know this world very well. And so the other day, a homie named David was giving a tour. We always have a lot of tour groups walking through our huge headquarters at Homeboy Industries. And they stop in front of my office. And it's one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat kind of thing. And I kind of wave, and he said with an overly loud voice, this is Father Greg. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries. He's a jujitsu priest. So I gave it my best. A homie texted me and he said, "Where are you at?" I said, "I'm in Yakima." And he says, "Japan?" So we may add a geography class to our work there. The prophet Habakkuk writes that the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. The vision that we're waiting for and working for is wanting the world to look differently than it currently looks. What Martin Luther King said about church could well be said about our Catholic schools in the Diocese of Yakima, that it's not the place these kids come to. It's always going to be the place they go from. And they're going to go from these schools to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Communities where there are no outcasts. Communities of educated Catholic kids who want to stand at the margins, because if you stand at the margins, look under your feet, the margins get erased because you chose to stand there. And you stand with an intentionality with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And you imagine a circle of compassion, and you imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And your schools in this diocese are in fact places where you leave in order to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And you stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. These are not just schools our kids go to. They are the places they will eventually go from so that they can live as though the truth were true, and they can put first things recognizably first. And they can take seriously what Jesus took seriously. He took 4 things seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional, compassionate, loving kindness, that's one thing, and acceptance. This is huge. This is powerful. Our Catholic schools are not the places our kids go to. They're the places they go from. And they try to imitate the kind of God we have, the God who loves us without measure and without regret. And we don't want them to settle for a partial God, but for a spacious, expansive God. For 30 years, I've been privileged. The homies have taught me so much. Gang members in Los Angeles who have shaped my heart, and the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I am closer to God than they are. They mangle the English language in a way that I always find not just charming, but it always illustrates something. I had a homegirl named Lisa, one of our trainees. We have 300 trainees, all gang members, all serious and violent, offending people who are a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done. And she came at the end of the day, she wanted to introduce her man to me. And she says, "This is my sufficient other." And I said, "No doubt." Not long ago, I've handed over the reins of our $19 million annual operation. It's the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. And it's nice not to have to kind of worry about cash flow and those budgets and stuff. So I have a CEO recently who's sort of taken over for me. And I had a homie come into my office. He said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." And I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." I said, "Well, I've just finished mine, so I kind of know what she's going through." But my favorite one happened when I was presiding at Mass at San Fernando Juvenile Hall. It's a big gym, and 500 gang members are in there, and I'm vested, and I'm sitting on a little folding chair, and you have this little hoja, this sheet that has the readings in English and Spanish, and you know how you do that when you preside those priests are here. You close your eyes. I think I'm going to listen to the word being proclaimed rather than reading along, and so I closed my eyes, and a gang member gets up there it was a psalm, the responsorial psalm, and with an overabundance of confidence, he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I look at the sheet, what the hell? And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. In the end, I don't know who, I am not sure I want to spend eternity with a God for whom that's so important, being exalted. I like the exhausted God. The God who kind of extends himself for the other. Like you might say, "How are you feeling?" "I'm tired." "I'm pooped," but it's a good tired. Because you spent the weekend with your grandkids or you helped somebody move into their apartment. It's a good tired. It's a generous, exhausted, loving, other-centered. And our Catholic schools are not the places our kids go to. They're the places they go from to reflect our exhausted God, who is so spacious and so loving and too busy loving us to have any time left to be disappointed in us. The original covenantal relationship says, "As I have loved you," God says, "so must you have a special preferential love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger." And God says this because he thinks that these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered in this particular way, God thinks they are trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God, which is the only thing that will quench God's thirst, is that we be united, that there not be an us and a them, but only us. And your kids don't just go to your Catholic schools, they go from them to reflect that sense of God's love and presence in the world, especially to folks who have been cut off. But the widow, orphan, and the stranger are the ones who are the trustworthy guides. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. And unless we welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. We don't go to the margins to make a difference. We go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different. Once I was interviewed on the Christian Broadcast Network by this woman, and she asked, "Well, what do you do at Homeboy Industries?" And I told her it was a very large place, and 15,000 gang members a year walk through our doors, and we have free tattoo removal, and no place on the planet removes more tattoos than we do, and we have job training, and we have 9 social enterprises. Thousands upon thousands of gang members reimagine their lives, and they find healing there so that they can leave our place after their 18 months with us, and the world will throw at them what it will. and they won't be toppled. And when I finished this litany of all the things we do at Homeboy Industries, she looked at me and she said, yeah, but how much time each day at Homeboy Industries do you spend praising God? And I didn't know what to say, so I looked at her and I said, all damn day. And I don't think she liked that answer very much. But somehow we want to choose to be enlightened witnesses, all of us, who through our love and kindness, tender compassion, we return people to themselves. And in the process, we get returned to ourselves, and suddenly it's God's dream come true. Kinship, connection. Let me just end with this story. It occurs sometimes to universities to invite me to their universities after they have forced their students to read my book against their will. And I'm not complaining, but not all that far from here, Spokane, Washington, Gonzaga University, my alma mater. They forced the freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart, so they asked me to go up there. And then they said, could you bring 2 homies with you? And I always do when people are going to pay for it, and so I always pick homies always the same way. I always pick gang members who are enemies, are rivals, so just so that they have to share a hotel room together just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. Not long ago, I took 2 homies to Washington, D.C. We were at LAX, and older guys, and dead serious, this guy says, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? And I said, well, yes, it's actually a requirement. We'll be flying home on American. So I picked 2 homies, Bobby, an African-American gang member who at the time worked in our Homeboy Bakery, which is part of our headquarters there, and Mario, who worked in our merchandise store where we sell all our logo stuff. And I've done this thousands of times, really, with men and women, so many times. I've never taken anybody more terrified and petrified of flying than this kid, Mario. He was just, I've never seen anything like it. He was hyperventilating, and we hadn't even boarded the plane yet. So we flew out of Burbank Airport, and it's a tiny airport with big bay windows and Southwest Airlines mainly, and they don't have that hermetically sealed chute where you get on to board the plane. They have those, you have to walk out into the tarmac, but they're big planes. But like you're the president, and you climb up the steps, big tall steps to the front of the plane or the steps to the back of the plane. And so Mario and I are sitting there, and Bobby's off walking somewhere, and our plane arrives. It's early morning, and I said, there's our plane. And I thought, my God, he may die before we actually climb up those stairs. And then I see our flight crew arrives, and I see 2 flight attendants, females, and both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps to the front of the plane. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. All right, perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that Mario, in my 30-year history of this organization, Mario is the most tattooed individual who has ever worked at Homeboy, which, trust me, is saying a lot. And he's all sleeved out. His neck is blackened with the name of his gang. Head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids. And I'd never been in public with him. So we were walking through Burbank Airport, and people are like this, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, which is funny because if you were to ask anybody at Homeboy on Monday, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here, they'd say Mario. He sells baked goods over the counter now in our bakery. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this happens all the time. They have the big talk Tuesday night. They say there'll be 1,000 people there. What they don't tell you is that they have 93 other talks that they didn't tell you about. This class, this lunch, this meeting, this class, all day long. So I tell Mario and Bobby, I'm not going to speak at any of those. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom and have them get up. And they were very nervous, especially Mario. But they did a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence, stories of abuse of every imaginable kind. I would not have survived a day of their childhoods. Honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. We all stood in awe at what they've had to carry rather than in judgment at how they carried it. So the nighttime came, and it was a big talk. So I kind of switched it up a little. I said, look, I want you guys to get up before me, which they hadn't planned to do. Do 5-7 minutes, do a little snapshot of your life so that I can include you in the question and answer period. And Mario was especially nervous, but they did a good job, and I did my thing. And then I said, yeah, questions. Yes, ma'am. And a woman stands, and she goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out of the gate. And Mario comes up to the microphone. He clutches the microphone, and he says, yes. And she says, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? And Mario's this tall, skinny drink of water, and he clutches the microphone. He's trembling, and he's closing his eyes, and I can feel the emotions rising, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say, and when suddenly he blurts, I just... And as soon as he says those two words, he retreats back to his microphone, clutching, trembling retreat. And now I can tell he's losing the battle with his tears. But he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry, and she looks at Mario and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And they, in turn, also returned to themselves. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. That you may be one, Jesus says. That's it. That we might take seriously what Jesus took seriously. That's it. Our Catholic schools in this diocese are not the places our kids go to. They will always be the places they go from to imitate the kind of God we have, where there is no us and them, there's just us. For only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. Thank you very much.